What's up guys, it's me Lumos Theromax, and today we're here to actually continue the story of Emerald Knight John Stewart. And for those of you who don't know, I covered a lot of his content from the 2021 run in my prior videos, so if you haven't, definitely be sure to check those out because they're honestly pretty wild. Because John has been on a wild ride where he absorbed this thing called the GodStorm, which was going to destroy all of creation, has weaponized it, and now we're back 2 years after the events of the original series and after Dark Crisis to follow up with John's story and his whole thing going on, because he's continuing his adventures through the dark sectors. So without any further ado, be sure to like and subscribe down low. And if you guys enjoy these recap videos where I just continue discussing all the crazy stuff, be sure to let me know in the comments. And let's get to it. So getting back into John Stewart's Emerald Knights, we essentially have the situation where we left off last time, where John had been fighting this new god, and this new god had been causing all sorts of different problems for him. And he essentially had overcome him, overpowered him, and his machinations of the GodStorm. And the GodStorm was created trying to recreate these new gods within the universe out of the souls of the innocent. So it was pretty sick, pretty twisted to kind of see the true machinations of this new god in real time. But we're going to follow up and see what happens with the rest of that story within the context of this situation. And one of the other major topics that happened within the context of that were these dark sectors popping up everywhere. And these dark sectors were like these really messed up like points in space-time that were considered between space and time, like hypertime and bleed abstractions, which was really crazy. And it took, I think they said, nearly half the Lantern Corps in order to penetrate those barriers, and John was sent out there to kind of figure out what was going on. And here we pick up with one of those dark sectors called Ektos 2 years later, and this is after the events of Dark Crisis 2. So as we roll up to that, we essentially have what appears to be the forces of that new god still running amok across dark sectors, still grabbing large factions of people and converting them into energy, essentially, as John Stewart's forces manage to roll up and start fighting them. Now, at this point in time, things are really weird, because when we left the Green Lantern Corps last, John Stewart had remade the central power battery, and essentially we were back to the status quo. But at this point in time, we have all these people using these individual like green balls of energy that John Stewart has essentially just gifted them. And rings are seemingly gone or destroyed at this point in time in the 2-year time skip. We don't get a lot of explanation whenever it comes to that. But John Stewart and his Neo Green Lanterns roll up, and they're fighting the forces of this new god, and John's essentially arguing with the leader of them named Phalanx, and he's saying like, yo, Isak, that new god is like just using you, man. And John starts eye lasering him, like the battle's going pretty well, but we're interrupted by Isak, that new god, who begins claiming like, yo, I'm not just evil, I'm trying to like actually save the cosmos, I'm trying to bring back all the new gods who died. And the majority of the new gods, especially for New Genesis, all perished in the Battle of Perpetua, and I don't believe they were reconstituted at all. So he really is kind of alone in that fact, and he's trying to bring back Orion, the Black Racer, Metron, and even Highfather, and he just wants to bring them back and to return things to the status quo of what the source intends, or at least what the source intends in his eyes. So rather than continue battling John here, because this is a lost battle, he essentially decides to utilize the energy source he had as this massive construct to just drain the souls or life energy from everyone present that he had already tried to convert, and to blow up the entire dark sector. And dark sectors within the context of the first series had some pretty whack scaling, and this is no exception. Blowing this up is really impressive. If not for John Stewart's machinations, the entire like dark sector was destroyed, and only one city out of the massive space that was the Dark Sector actually was saved by John Stewart. And John Stewart just does some really crazy stuff from time to time within the context of this story. And it was funny to also see here Lobo, he like John Stewart quote Lobo and say Bastage. That's pretty funny context. But he basically creates a construct around this entire city, saves the city, adjusts, it stabilizes everything like gravity, the atmosphere, and the orbit that exists to make sure that this place is somewhat safe for everyone to travel. And some of the Neo Green Lanterns that he's hanging out with basically meme out on him, saying, "Oh, okay, thank you, Space Jesus. Like, you do everything for us. You gave us like weaponry, like a base, like your mini version of Green Lantern rings, but like it sucks because we're just so far left in the dust by you anymore." And John's complaining that he basically looked like a rookie running into Isak's trap like that and only being capable of saving the amount of people that he did. And Lonar, the new god of journeys and travels, it take you on a travel through life, man, just to show up and say, yeah, well, like you pretty much are a rookie, you're dealing with gods. And whenever it comes to dealing with gods, things are just different. You have to think in more of an abstract sense. And we get a really unique like outlook on how the god sphere level characters and new gods kind of look at the idea of what he calls the multiverse, but in reality it's just like all of space and time. And it's one of those things where everything comes from one point, but they all branch off, and there's all sorts of different branches that actually roll into themselves. And this is our first time of getting like a general idea of where like the concepts hypertime are kind of located. And hypertime is like this really abstract like idea of there are timelines, and there are timelines that branch off and then return, or just branch off entirely and create their own separate timelines, and that aren't in the canon worlds you will find in the Ori. And so it's kind of cool to get just an extra little bit of cosmological lore. And the reason why we got all this is that new god Isak is essentially utilizing and dragging worlds from those hypertime existences inside the main continuity, and that's what these dark sectors are. And that it's kind of like messing with creation. And so he's using the life forces of beings who do exist but aren't necessarily in the main continuity to cheat out like how things normally function whenever it comes to creating his new gods. Because he doesn't see what he's doing as murderers, because they're just like hypertime extractions. Why would he care about like ideas like that when new gods are only created through the genuine sources within the context of the universe, that being like individual worlds that aren't hypertime extractions? It's kind of weird, kind of abstract, but I mean, it's a new god storyline, so like what can you really expect whenever it comes to like their machinations? But that being said, this new god, the god of travels, goes on to say like gods are fundamental forces of the universe, so when it changes and grows, we do too. And he's not doing that. The reason why this new god, Isak, is so crazy is that unlike all the other new gods, he's essentially never chosen a concept to embody. And without having chosen any concept to embody, he basically has unlimited power, which is like the most busted thing ever. But I mean, new gods, right? New gods just have these moments. But this is one of the reasons why John Stewart wants to stop him, is because A, he's a new god running around with essentially unbridled power. But on top of that, he's just like wilding and doing some really crazy shit, trying to bring back the rest of the new gods. And it killed millions in the process, which is absolutely whack. But the Neo Green Lanterns he's rolling around with basically are super salty because they don't really have much power, especially in comparison to John. So John forges them these new weapons, these swords that basically are comparable to Green Lantern rings and have far more power than he had before. And these weapons actually drain him with how much energy he puts in them, so that should give you an idea of how like absurdly powerful these things are. But John's next goal is essentially team up with Lonar, teleport to the home base of this guy, this new god Isak, and just roll him. And so all of them choose to do so, and they do so at his home base a little known place called Zanshee. Now, the significance of Zanshee is something that goes back in Green Lantern history. I mean, all the way back to at least the 80s. 90s, I believe. And Zanshee is a world that John Stewart's arrogance actually fucked up. And be sure to check out my short video on it, because it's actually pretty sick. But yeah, so John Stewart feels responsible for having destroyed this planet, and it's no secret that there's a variety of reasons why this new god would want to utilize this specific world against John. A, it's going to mess with his head, and B, it's one of the Crux worlds. And these Crux worlds were essentially these worlds that are like the most important worlds in the universe that will create new life, that will ascend past anything that came before it. So basically the most dangerous worlds and the most relevant worlds for cultivating the most powerful life in creation. And his goal, like John Stewart rolls up on this place to end the goals of whatever this new god is, and he's repping some pretty sick armor. He rolls up almost like a gladiator, and he immediately two-shots this guy Phalanx he was having problems with the first time he had thrown hands with him, saying, yo, I'm here for a sock, and I'm not gonna stop until I deal with this new god. As he shows up to the place, he actually notices that he's draining the souls of all the people on side Zanshee to create a new Orion, this Neo new god who is just like massive in scope. And the first thing he does is immediately blast John Stewart with these eye beams and absolutely shreds the armor off of John Stewart, as this new god Asak begins monologuing pretty hardcore, claiming that he told him that it's too late and he's going to recreate all these new gods regardless of his actions. But he wants to show him why he's doing what he's doing. And he immediately attempts to throw a mind tax on John Stewart, who immediately recognizes, yo, this is like mind tax, like come on man. And it looks like we're getting a filter to the 50s whenever we do this too. We get like the classic look of like the new gods and new Genesis and everything whenever he does do this. And he says, yo, you've been fighting, but like you've ascended even, but like that's not going to stop what's happening. Life is a constant struggle, crisis and rebirth and change is like all these things are happening all the different time. It's a chaotic cycle. And I just want to bring things back to the non-chaotic part. I just want to make this happen. And if I have to essentially create a roundabout way into emulating the life source, then so be it. And John's like, yeah, but you're doing that by murdering a bunch of people. You can't be doing that, bro. Like, come on. And he says, well, why are you using Zanshee? And he basically follows up with, well, I mean, it's a Crux world. And my first few crucibles into the dark sectors couldn't necessarily deal with all the different Crux worlds. And if you didn't have a new god's help of figuring out where it was at, you wouldn't even have been able to do it, because the barriers on them are so thick, especially Crux World, because they're so much stronger. And he says, but yo, this isn't an alternative Zanshee, this is the real deal. He says, your wife Kamatui could be out there. And John's like, yo, I ain't having that, I don't believe you, like, it is what it is, huh? And it's just then that the entire Green Lantern Corps with their new swords roll up and immediately imprison Asak. And he says, wait a minute, I thought you were pretty weak, but like, and he says, yeah, I put half my power inside of these blades that they're wielding. And he says, I couldn't trust myself with that level of power, especially rolling up into a villain like you. And he says, but there's more to it than that. And a John Stewart flies in with the rest of the GLC. And turns out John Stewart can just make shadow clones out of his hypertime selves. But the crazy part is like, no matter how many times he splits himself, the source itself won't allow him to have an equal, won't allow him to duplicate himself with the same level of power. He has to share the power he has, even between his other hypertime extractions, because like John Stewart's just that busted with the full power of the GodStorm itself. And even Asak is kind of like impressed by this. So before he can do much else, John Stewart immediately throws him into what he calls a mind field. And the new god's like, bro, I'm a no god. You're not going to be able to out-hacks me like that. Like, come on. And John's like, okay, I just want you to hear me out. You're never going to die. I could kill you, but you'll just return to the source. And I'm here to deal with you. And he's like, bro, you think you can give me some sort of insight because you're powerful? And he says, no, not insight. I want you to understand. I want you to have some compassion for what's going on here. The GodStorm gave me power, true, but it gave me the ability to evolve and adapt, and you never really did that. And Isaac basically says, yeah, because that's madness, it's corruption. And he says, well, no, it's life. Life evolves, life changes. And if you're going to evolve and change, you need to accept some level of godhood. You need to accept what you're the god of. And at this point in time, Isaac begins to realize what John's trying to tell him. Like, whether you want to or not, life changes and you're no exception. And immediately he recognizes what he is the god of, and Isaac becomes the new god of nostalgia, always trying brought back things from the past and keep things the way they are in the past. And he basically embodies this concept from this point on, and he even regrets it. He says, what have you done to me? And John Stewart says, well, I just helped you understand who you were, but by doing so, I also restricted your power. And Isaac looks at him and says, curse you for having forced me to limit my power subconsciously, but you know what? This isn't the last time you'll see the end of the god of nostalgia. And he immediately kind of disappears. And John Stewart afterwards teams up with John Stewart, his Hypertime shadow clone, and basically says, yeah, there can't really be two of us. I mean, this is like pretty whack. So he just fuses with him afterwards, because that's something John Stewart can do, is just call on other versions of himself from Hypertime to just like solve his problems. Dude, John Stewart is sort of just unbelievable. And he also hooked up stronger weapons afterwards with all of the Neo Green Lanterns that he's kind of hanging out with. And he and these Neo Green Lanterns roll out with the God of Journeys to essentially deal with the rest of the problems that they have to deal with in the universe. But also, John Stewart sets out to find his wife, Kat Batui, on the planet of Zanshee within that dark sector. And we end where we kind of, we end essentially there with chapter 1, and we're only going to be rolling into further things. But the really sad part about this entire comic is they have like the most heart-wrenching Kevin Conroy tribute at the end of this. That, dude, it's just so sad. Big rip to my boy Kevin Conroy. Give a comment down low for my boy Kevin Conroy. Well, it sure is getting to be quite a crazy time for John Stewart and the rest of these like GLs who are kind of hanging out with him that have these new weapons. But I look forward to finding out exactly what's going on. We know this isn't a one-shot simply because, the new God of Journeys at the end of the comic literally says in chapter 1, so clearly we're going to be continuing, and I believe this is set to have a variety of issues in it. So we're going to get more John Stewart content as time comes on, although I'll be honest, I'm a little bit upset we're not getting more direct Green Lantern stuff versus John Stewart becoming Space Jesus, but right now in the world of DC, I'll take what I can get, because they don't really give us a lot of options, if I'm being real. But that being said, be sure to like and subscribe down low. Tell me what you guys think. And also, tell me what you guys think John Stewart should be doing with this level of power from now on. Because I really thought he would have lost this like Crisis Superman did during Dark Crisis. Whenever they were revived, they were just returned to their base states or whatever. But John said, no, I'm keeping that action. But that being said, we'll see you next time, Lanterns. Later.